apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition, and this is an opportunity to look at a number of stories that have already sort of unfolded and to look ahead. Are we going to have a government shutdown over the wall? That's certainly one issue. The Supreme Court had the opportunity to take a particular case related to Planned Parenthood and did not. We, of course, will be talking about one of the cases the Supreme Court did take, a Bladensburg case, and also watch for a few others that might come there. And so we have some of those issues on the table. A new chief of staff for Donald Trump, who might that be? And lots of other things to talk about. Penna Dexter in here, and it is always great to have you. And for those of you watching online, you got to see her Christmas outfit, so you look really good.
Well, it's very Christmassy in here. You've got a great tree here for us to enjoy during the program. You know, this chief of staff issue, I mean, it's almost a question now of who wants the job. It's a rough job.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I was reading in the article that we posted, and I thank you for your suggestion. This article here is one that Penna suggested. Just reminded me of the fatigue factor, whether you're in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, now the Trump administration. Now, I do think this president makes things even more difficult, but nevertheless, it's a difficult job indeed. And we also, of course, have Lathan Watts, who is, again, the Director of Community Relations for First Liberty. Just always great to have you with us as well.
Always good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
And one of the things I thought we might do for just a few minutes is that obviously this is a national show, but this hour it's a little bit more local. A large portion of our audience are Dallas-based, although we do have people listening in Reno and Minneapolis and a number of other places. And so I thought we'd take some local stories that certainly have an impact nationwide as well. And one of those has to do, as some of our Dallas listeners not be aware of the fact that there's a man by the name of Kerby Anderson. He is about ready to graduate from the University of Texas at Dallas. But let me give you the backstory. Here is an individual who at Baylor University had all sorts of allegations of raping a student at Baylor University back in 2016. Was expelled from Baylor. I think a lot of people sort of lost track of him, and the other day was able to plead no contest. Even though there were 4 counts of sexual assault and all sorts of other concerns about him, he was able to plead no contest to 1 count of unlawful restraint. Now, we can get into the plea bargain issue and all the rest, but I thought the bigger issue for just a minute, Penna, was the fact that it turns out he was at the University of Texas at Dallas. Now, on the one hand, you can see why there was an attempt to ban him. There was a petition that went out as soon as somebody discovered that he was there at UTD. And so my heart says, if I had a daughter there, yeah, I'd sign that petition and I'd get him out of there as quickly as possible. But my head says, you know, the justice system spoke. Whether I agree with that decision or not, he is not registered as a sex offender. He was not accused of, he was not at least convicted of sexual assault. And in this case, at least for UTD, it worked out pretty well. He is going to graduate on Tuesday, but he's not allowed back on campus. But imagine if it was mid-semester. What do you do then? And so it really puts into conflict the concern about individuals that could pose a danger at a place like UTD, and then what we call due process. What are your thoughts?
Right. Well, Baylor expelled him, and that's the reason he went to UTD. And then he was just going there and was able to actually almost complete his time there before this came to light. And, you know, there's just so many questions. It's almost hard to comment because I did notice that Anderson's attorney said that the account of assault was riddled with distortions and misrepresentations. a witness saw Anderson and the woman who accused him kissing passionately at the party that night. So there was, some compliance on her part, but, I don't, that is not apparent right now. But what is apparent, I think, is that because he was not legally barred from the school, I don't think the school really had the right. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that it would have been the right thing to do to just allow him to finish his time and perhaps have another chance.
Yes. And again, if we believe in second chances, and again, I just thought I got the two perfect people in the around the round table here, because you've written about the #MeToo issue, and then we do have a lawyer here around the table, so it'd be interesting to get into that conversation as well. So, again, the thought is, again, we don't have to adjudicate what took place down there in Waco. But if indeed an individual shows up at your school and maybe they knew or didn't know, and he at that time had not actually been convicted, and even now pleaded to one count of unlawful restraint, do I throw that person out on?
I don't really think so.
Yeah.
And, this is a national issue right now. The Secretary of Education is being critiqued and criticized now for changing our policies with regard to the accused and the accusers that were so slanted against the accused beginning in the Obama administration that it was unfair. So that this is playing out underneath that. And as Betsy DeVos tries to bring this back into sort of a more fair type of policy,
right,
she's receiving a lot of critique across the nation for doing that from Me Too types, from feminists and others. So this is a very dicey issue. And I think in this case, certainly you watch out for something, and, authorities should be aware of this young man. But I think that giving him another chance would have been the right thing to do.
And again, let me just mention before we get to Lathan's comments that you have written an article on #MeToo for The Outlook. You've also talked about Betsy DeVos and what the Department of Education's tried to do to really give individuals due process. And when you think about this, and didn't we have something in the Senate Judiciary Committee a few weeks ago about this whole issue of due process? So, Lathan, what about this issue?
Yeah, I think it's a good case study, really, in sort of what's going on in the country at large about are we going to make decisions, whether it's policy or legally or not, based on what makes us feel better,
yes,
or what the law is and what the Constitution requires and what our country was founded upon. If this guy was charged with 4 counts of sexual assault, but then he walks away basically with 1 count of unlawful restraint, I mean, obviously I wasn't in the courtroom and I wasn't in that DA's office. That sounds to me like they didn't have much of a case.
Yeah, they thought he might be acquitted. I do know that much. Yes,
right. So you have that. You have, the entire premise of our criminal justice system is based upon better than 10 guilty men go free than 1 innocent man go to prison.
You. Yeah,
and whether he did not, that's how the case was adjudicated. He obviously has not gotten into trouble at UTD, or we would have heard about it. The fact that 20,000 people signed a petition that I don't want him here, well, this may be tough to hear, but your opinion doesn't matter. Your feelings about this person don't really matter. This is why the founders were very suspicious of democracy. Democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the vigilante spirit,
Right.
Some people said, well, I'll take care of him,
Yeah. I mean, this is feelings versus facts. And the university had a, responsibility. And likely if they had acted on that petition, they'd probably be seeing legal action from him.
I would think so. Well, we got a lot more to cover. I'd just love to get your comments as well. 1-800-351-1212. We will come back. There's another case I want to put on the table. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The carol O Come, Emmanuel is an English translation of a Latin hymn that was sung during Advent and Christmas. The text goes back to at least the 18th century and perhaps much earlier, while the music goes back to the 15th century. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Emmanuel means God with us. Even before the coming of Christ, we see passages in the Old Testament that remind us that God was with Israel. In 1 Kings 8, we read, Praise the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the wonderful promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us or abandon us. In Psalm 46, we read that the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. One of the most visible reminders of God's presence was during the Exodus. God was with the Israelites as a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day. His presence was with them in the tabernacle and later in the temple in the Holy of Holies. But the most important aspect of Emmanuel is found in the New Testament. John tells us in his gospel, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is the miracle of the incarnation. God put on human flesh and came to Israel so that he might give his life for all of us. Paul writes to Timothy, Here is the great mystery of our religion. Christ came as a human. This is what we celebrate at Christmas. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We are privileged to have in studio with us today Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts. And again, we talked about the story of Jacob Anderson. And if you wanted to address that, certainly that is a case. And when we talk in just a few minutes about this whole idea of criminal justice reform and sentencing reform, an issue right now before the United States Senate, that's relevant. But I thought I'd put one more issue on the table. But if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212, or some of you might say, well, I don't really want to call in, but I want to make a comment. We, of course, broadcast as well on Facebook Live. So I will check those in just a minute in case some of you have a comment about this. And Penna, here's another one. In the Republican Party this time in Tarrant County, the vice chairman is an individual by the name of Shahid Safi, and he is Pakistani, very qualified individual, has been supported by a lot of Republican leaders that you and I know, both in Collin County, where I am right now, Dallas County, and even over there in Tarrant County. But you have some Republicans that say, well, he's a Muslim, so that means he believes in Sharia law, and we just want to get him out. And the question that you have on some of these is if the only reason you have why you want to get him out is Muslim, that doesn't strike me as fair, and kind of gets us back to this whole issue of due process. If you disagree with him on where he stands on Second Amendment issues, and I've heard him speak enough to know, I probably have some disagreements there, or what he feels about taxation or something like that, that's fine. But just to put him out simply because he's a Muslim who's never shown that he supports Sharia law, I think is a good example of an overreaction by at least a few people in Tarrant County.
We Christians don't want to be treated that way and just pegged because we're a Christian and you don't agree with me, so I don't have the right to serve. So I think he has, if he's risen to that position. He's proved himself competent. He's been chosen. He should have the right to serve. Now, Sharia law is very dangerous, and there certainly are attempts all over the country in various areas by various groups of Muslims to try to implement it. And so I don't think that would be acceptable if you saw him in that mode and attempting to enact that. That's not part of this story.
Yes.
So I think he has the right to serve.
I would think so. Lathan, I think you'd agree, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And just politically, this is just dumb.
Yeah, that's the other part I was going to get to. You talk about optics. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to have more Muslims or fewer Muslims in the Republican Party? You know, throw this guy out. You will never see another Muslim vote Republican in your lifetime.
You know, Ronald Reagan, in one of his speeches at CPAC, said you don't build a majority party by starting out talking about all the people you're not willing to work with.
Right.
So, considering what happened in the most recent election,
yes,
the Republican Party in Texas has work to do,
it sure
and has
does.
work to do in Tarrant County. This is just, I mean, it's just baffling to me. I mean, this is walking and chewing gum at the same time.
I'm not baffled because I do know some Republicans that really think that way.
I
It's
do.
kind of sad.
Yeah, that's a sad reality.
And just like you said, I mean, they wouldn't want to be treated this way. They wouldn't want to be stereotyped this way. What is the typical stereotype that those on the left say about Republicans, right? Racists, bigots, xenophobes, homophobes, every other kind of phobe you can come up with. They just list it out. That's the Republican Party, right?
Sure.
Well, frankly, stereotypes wouldn't become stereotypes if there wasn't a grain of truth in them.
Yeah.
And when you act like this, you play right into the stereotype that that your opponents want to beat you over the head with every election cycle. I don't know the man. I don't know. I read a little bit about what was going on, and
Sure.
If he is within the mainstream of the Republican Party, which I don't think he would be in this position if he wasn't,
Right.
then what are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, again, George P. Bush and even former House Speaker Joe Strauss. So you go kind of all the way along the spectrum from some that, and a couple other conservatives. And some people say, okay, well, then how would you draw the line? Well, I say that somebody who really believes in Sharia law, as we have in our little booklet on Sharia law, violates at least 3 constitutional principles. And the way to remember that is 1, 8, and 14. 1, that is, be the First Amendment, and that is Sharia law would be the dominant rule. And so if you were convinced that Sharia law had to be implemented, that would violate the First Amendment very easily because it would be an establishment of religion. It violates the Eighth Amendment because that's a cruel and unusual punishment. Anybody that's been in a Sharia-compliant country recognizes that some of these punishments would certainly be considered cruel and unusual. And 14 stands for the 14th Amendment, and that's the idea of equal protection, because under Sharia law, a Muslim has higher value and more rights than a non-Muslim. And Penna, I hate to say it, even in a Muslim world, the man has more rights than a woman. So 1, 8, 14. And so if you get a sense that somebody is sort of moving in that direction, I think your easy argument is it's not constitutional. This person seems to agree with the Constitution. So back to Lathan. What in the world are you doing, and why are we doing that in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, in my lifetime of following politics and working in and around it, there seems to be nobody any better at forming circular firing squads than the Republican Party.
Yes.
It's just, it makes me want to pull my hair out.
I know.
When,
and you've
when
worked
we
on a
do
couple of
stuff like
campaigns where it's killed you, just about. You know?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
either directly or indirectly, been a part of the political process for 16, 18 years. I mean, that's quite a few election cycles. And this sort of thing is not how you build a majority party, whether it's in Tarrant County, in the state of Texas, and certainly not nationwide, because this isn't just a story around here.
Yeah,
this story did get picked up.
This got picked
this
up
is
by
the
the
kind of
Washington
thing
Post,
that the news wires love to talk about Texas politics when something like this happens. So it's not helpful.
Yeah,
it's certainly not how you go about building a coalition of people to govern with.
I think the state of Texas, we do have a bad reputation sometimes for the way we express our conservative values. And, we kind of got spanked a little bit in the last election cycle. So we need to learn. We need to not moderate our values or our ideas, our conservatism, but our actions do need to be the kind of actions that you've always advocated, Kerby, that, we listen to people and then we evaluate their positions based on their positions, not on who they are, what their race is, what their gender is, whatever. And so we have to pay more attention to this now, I think, than we ever have, because we're noticing that there's attempts from all quarters really to, I guess the best way to put it is turn the state purple.
Yeah.
And so we conservatives need to be sort of above reproach, I think, in a sense, in the way we just deal with people.
And I was just thinking about this in our latest booklet on constitutional interpretation. I talk about how those who are kind of the modernists, the living constitutionalist type, they count by race and they count by gender, and they really look at people as groups. But if you're an originalist or a Christian, you believe that we're created in the image of God and we treat people as individuals, and we believe the Constitution's individual rights. And so in some respects, I want to say to some of these kind of radical conservatives, radical whatever these people are getting upset about it, you're more like the liberals than you are like us, because really we believe in a colorblind society where each individual, no matter whether they're rich or poor, black, white, Hispanic, whatever they might be, whether they're male or female, all have value and dignity because they're created in the image of God and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, right?
Absolutely. And if you made your judgment call about this man based solely on the one thing that you knew about him, that he was a Muslim, you have prejudged him. That is the textbook definition. That's the etymology of the word prejudice.
Yes.
You prejudged him based on one category that he fits into.
Well said.
And that is something that we, as you just said, we advocate against in private life and in public policy, that people are individuals. And that's how we want to be treated. It's how we should treat everyone else, not looking at them and immediately assigning to them some value or some ideas based on what we can see, their gender, their race, their ethnicity, their religion, whatever that may be. I mean, that's exactly what we've been fighting against in public policy for as long as I can remember. And we do ourselves no favors when we appear to be doing this ourselves right in our own backyard.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we've been talking about some negatives. Let's talk about some positives. One of those relates to this idea of criminal justice. State of Texas has been a model for the nation on how to reduce the recidivism rate. And so we'll talk about that for just a minute or two. And then, of course, since we have Lathan Watts here, I want to get an update on what we are dealing with in terms of some of these court cases. We're going to a little bit later talk about a court case that the Supreme Court did not take, Planned Parenthood, but they did take the one on Bladensburg, and everybody's kind of curious about that. And at least once a week, I have somebody saying, now, where are we with the Coach Kennedy case? And I said, well, I wish I could give you an answer to that, but you can give us a little more of an update. So we'll take a break and come back. If you'd like to leave some comments on Facebook Live, you can do so. If you'd like to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, or just sit back and listen, and we'll be right back.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us. And we've been talking about the state of Texas. We're going to move on in just a minute, but I thought I'd use Texas for one more illustration, and that is right now, before the United States Senate is a very significant criminal justice reform bill. Now, we've talked about this on numerous occasions. Star Parker has been on this program with us and a variety of others talking about this. And, of course, we last week even had Dr. Merrill Matthews, and a colleague of his has been very significantly involved with that. But if you look at the state of Texas, this is a good example of sometimes how the states are the, if you will, the experimental factories in federalism. And so both in the state of Texas, and let's give credit to Mississippi. Mississippi is one that's implemented some of this as well, which would prevent judges from, in a sense, imposing fines on individuals and essentially creating what might be like a debtor's prison. They are supposed to take into account the ability to pay a fine. So that's one of the pieces that is part of that as well. I might also mention that there are some others in terms of recognizing that there is a significant difference between about 86% of the people in federal prison right now are nonviolent offenders in terms of drugs, and about 14% are some of those higher ups. And so as a result, we've talked about this through some people through the Heritage Foundation that say, many times they get thrown into prison simply because of a mandatory federal law that was implemented back when we were concerned about crack and cocaine back in the 1990s. I know Lathan's going to help educate us on that in just a minute, but I thought it was really helpful to understand that these very significant reforms, many of which come out of places like Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, where in many cases Christians have gotten involved in the criminal justice system. Matter of fact, I had a warden from one of the outstanding prisons in Louisiana sitting in that chair, Penna, just not so long ago, Burl Cain, talking about some of the things they've done where individuals are now getting Bible college and seminary degrees while they're in seminary and coming out and being outstanding individuals in the community. So there's a good example of, in some cases, maybe we can learn some things from Texas that we can apply nationally. Your
yeah,
thoughts?
A lot of these programs, as you said, are faith-based, and it's really taking the opportunity when they're in prison to give them the opportunity to be rehabilitated, to do some kind of a program. And, in a sense, there's the sentencing laws have provided for these sentences that may not quite match the crimes for some of these. So this is an attempt to try to fix that. And it was interesting today, you mentioned Heritage. I guess it was the other day that Kay Coles James, who's president, wrote about a case, James Dawsey. And he was a young, small-time, street-level drug dealer's assistant. And he was convicted of selling 88.1 grams of crack cocaine. He had no prior convictions. And there was no choice for the judge but to hand down a 5-year sentence. And so, that was a pretty big sentence for the crime. Federal prisons, though, at least if they're in there, can provide these types of programs. And so, it's good that the House has already passed this. The Senate is considering it. I know they've tweaked it because some people were concerned that it was a little light on some criminals.
Yes.
But it looks like, in a sense, it's an attempt to deal with the challenges that the people face that will enable them to come out and be more productive members of society. And it sort of parallels with this case that we talked about earlier with the student, because this young man, he was not convicted. Mm-hmm. He is going to be a member of the society. He's going to be out living among us. And so the fact that he was in a school, he managed to get in, he managed to get almost all the way through, to then pull the rug out from under him, that could have been a make or break thing for him.
Yes.
And so I think and there's just millions of cases like that across the country in prisons. So, you have to be careful, of course, not to let people out that are going to do damage, and there's no guarantees there. But the idea behind this, the sense that we're doing something right now to perhaps pull back on it a little bit, is good.
Again, when we had Rebecca Heglin on, and she used to be the vice president there at Heritage, she said, "You've never met anybody who's more stronger on crime than I am. You know, I've always been a lock 'em up." And then she said, "I began to look at some of these stories." Or Tom Giovanetti, who is, again, one of the colleagues with Merrill Matthews, said, "You know, I've met some of these individuals, and then they'll tell me later that they were in prison." As a matter of fact, here, an interesting study found that about half of Americans have family members who've been incarcerated. So is it possible to have a second chance? Yes, there is. Now, to be fair, there are at least a few individuals that we really respect. Senator Tom Cotton, for example, and Frank Gaffney are two that have been against this. But I think you solve that, as Ted Cruz points out, by having an amendment that he wanted to add to this. So I think before it's all through, this could be something that would be very positive. And Lathan, give us some of the history, because you have done some of the work here, that one of the reasons we had this hard-on-crime mindset is because of the crack cocaine and the drug abuse that happened in the late 80s, early 90s. So we just said, we're just going to throw everybody in jail. And a lot of them are low-level junkies that just got into trafficking in drugs just to pay for their habit, and we're not doing them or our society a favor by putting them in jail.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of the call for strengthening the laws on narcotics, specifically cocaine and crack cocaine,
right,
were coming from leaders from urban areas.
Yeah,
because when crack cocaine came on the scene, it exploded in urban areas, and so you had both faith-based leaders and political leaders in those urban areas saying, you have to do something about this. This is an epidemic in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did. They started putting stiffer penalties on crack cocaine, powder cocaine, upping the sentences, the mandatory minimums, all of these things to try to take these people off the streets who were selling this yes. product in the inner cities in America. And, fast forward a few years, and now you have some of these same people, unfortunately, saying that law that they don't want to tell you that they were some of the people advocating for it way back when. That's a racist law that targeted African Americans and other minorities because they get this sort of sentence for this, and you get a different kind of sentence for that. Look, the justice system isn't perfect because it's administered by fallible human beings,
right?
And no law crafted in Congress, in D.C. or any state capital is perfect because it's crafted by fallible human beings. You do the best you can. That was a response to an epidemic of a problem. If we now see, hindsight being 20/20, that it went too far one way and it has created these other situations that need to be remedied, then remedy them.
Yeah.
Because when you go into prison, you are not coming out the same person.
That is so true.
You will come out worse or better. You will not come out the same way.
That's exactly right.
And so these programs that are going on in prisons trying to help people rehabilitate and come out better absolutely should be encouraged. And if there's policy in place that are putting people in prison for longer than is really practicable, then yes, we need to change those. One of the cases, I'm glad you mentioned Mississippi. There's a special place in my heart for Mississippi.
I know there. And there's a whole story just about that, which we've posted before. Yeah.
But I defended or argued a case in Mississippi on behalf of a guy who was convicted of a drug offense.
Mm-hmm.
And, excuse me, before the sentencing hearing, had voluntarily already gone to rehab, kicked his drug habit. Everything he had done criminally was supporting this drug habit. And I remember telling the judge, if you send this guy to the state prison farm, the likelihood is he'll be back on drugs in a month. Because if you think there aren't illegal drugs in prisons, you are fooling yourself.
Yeah.
And the best case scenario for this guy, for my client, is you have house arrest available to you as a sentencing alternative for this guy. Let him continue on the path that he's on. He's already voluntarily gone to rehab and kicked the drug habit, and he's got a job, and he's doing these things. He's trying to improve his life. Do not put this guy behind bars. He will not come out the same way he's going in.
That's right.
And if we, Congress can change some of these laws to prevent scenarios like that from happening, they absolutely should. And I love Tom Cotton, one of my favorite senators.
Yep.
If he's got concerns, they need to be addressed. And I think what Cruz said is probably right. There's probably ways to amend it. politics sometimes is the art of the possible. If you can get 8 out of 10 things in this bill right now, get them and go back and fix the stuff that you don't like with another bill if necessary. But
Penna, this is one of the few times where you have Democrats and Republicans agreeing, and we may not see much more of that in the next couple of years.
Well, I mean, there is sort of, at the beginning of this debate, it was sort of a wrap on it that it was perhaps liberal and more of a Democrat-leaning policy. But Mike Lee has made some good cases, the senator from Utah, that it's really, in a sense, this idea is conservative because, number one, it saves money.
Yes.
It helps people. It helps individuals to thrive in society, which is a conservative idea. That's why it's had to be, I think, combed through and amended. And, as you said, it may not be perfect. We may not get everything we want. But the idea is taking us on a conservative path, not a liberal one.
I would think so. Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, a lot of them like it. So we'll come back, and we've got a lot more to cover right after this.
A feminist writer and podcaster named Megan Murphy recently had her Twitter account suspended due, she thinks, to her observation that, quote, men aren't women. The notice from Twitter said this was hate speech. This reveals the conflict between two ideologies of the left, feminism and transgenderism. Ms. Murphy maintains that the transgender ideology undermines feminism because feminism depends upon femaleness being a real gender category. If men can be women, then what is feminism? The first iteration of feminism celebrated the differences between men and women and sought rights for women in light of those differences. But when feminism moved into its radical second wave in the 1960s, there was this attempt to deconstruct gender. Radical feminists would not tolerate references to differences between men and women. They insisted upon sexual parity in all discussions. At the same time, they sought the advancement of women. The transgender moment we're in is a very uncomfortable one for the feminist who maintains this kind of thinking. It's pretty tough to reconcile the push for opportunities and rights for women with the idea that gender is fluid and men can be women. The feminist movement can celebrate real accomplishments in fields like women's sports, but the transgender movement mitigates the good in this by insisting that biological males be allowed to participate. In a commentary, John Stonestreet of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview asks the question, are women real? If men can be women, then this is a fair question. John Stonestreet suggests that feminists and progressives consider the principle outlined in the book of Genesis, that there is a difference between sexes, and this is an intrinsic and good feature of human nature that together magnifies the divine image which both men and women bear. Radical feminism's logical successor is transgender ideology. Some feminists, like Megan Murphy, are beginning to realize the two cannot coexist. Christians can show them a better way. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I might mention, for those of you listening online, you just heard Penna Dexter's Viewpoints commentary, which we will get to a little bit later. I like to always wait till we have the complete national audience to focus on that, but that is available on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you'll also see that we yesterday spent some time announcing, I guess it was the day before, announcing the new trip to Israel and Rome this time. We've gone to Israel and Greece last time, but we will in October go to Israel and Rome. You can go to either or both. And again, that's on the website as well. And we've been talking about drugs. I've already talked about some of the booklets that we have on Sharia law and constitutional interpretation, but the one on drug abuse coming out very shortly. So again, if you're a donor and you aren't receiving those, you might check into what it requires for you to just receive those on a regular basis here through Point of View. But Lathan, while I got you for a few minutes, the question I get all the time is, okay, where are we on some of these cases? And one of those cases, which we may come back to a little bit later talking about again, is the Bladenberg's case and the Cross case. And that one is in front of the Supreme Court. Some people have asked, when are oral arguments and when will the decision come down? Tell us more.
Right. So the Supreme Court did grant cert, so they are going to hear the case. Oral argument will be in March. So what's going on right now is the briefs are being prepared. Our side of the case, their side of the case, our response, and amicus briefs, friends of the court, people who aren't litigants in the matter, but who have a stake in it, who want to weigh in on it. That's what a friend of the court brief is. Those are all coming due. I think the amicus briefs are due actually on Christmas Eve. So sorry for you lawyers out there writing amicus briefs.
Isn't that funny?
So those are being collected right now and prepared. They'll be filed with the court soon, and then they will argue the case in March. And then typically something argued in March, we can reasonably expect a decision, I would say, in June. So it's kind of the calm before the storm. We had a whole lot of activity leading up to the grant of the cert petition, and now we go through with the nuts and bolts of the case in front of the Supreme Court, and oral argument will be in March.
If we click on your picture and it takes us to First Liberty, you'll see one place where it says, "Let it be," and there's a place where they can sign a petition. And they'll also see this article where it says, "It's on," Supreme Court to consider Bladensburg. But if you go a little bit further, it has this little box that says 7th overtime for Coach Kennedy. What's going on there?
So Coach Kennedy, our client up in the Seattle area, Bremerton, Washington, just in case people haven't heard me talk about him before, football coach, made a commitment to God when he was given the opportunity to coach football that at the end of every game he would go to the 50-yard line and take a knee and say a brief 15, 30-second silent prayer, just thanking God for the opportunity to coach. And he did that for almost 7 years without anyone ever complaining or really even commenting on it.
Right.
In fact, nobody ever did really complain.
Yeah.
His school district found out about his practice through a compliment from another school.
Wow.
And, like, hey, I think that's great what Coach Kennedy does. And like, what do you mean? They told him, oh, we can't have that. So we represented him at the trial court level, lost at the Ninth Circuit, expectedly, and appealed to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court meets, 9 of them get in a room and discuss cases, take a vote on whether or not to take a case or not. It takes 4 of them to agree to take the case in order for them to grant the cert petition. Coach Kennedy's case has been listed for conference, which is that conversation they have, has been listed for conference and then relisted, I think, 7 times now.
7th overtime.
So there's really no way of knowing what's going on. The only people in the room when they do this are the 9 justices.
Yeah.
And so you're really left to just kind of, it's a parlor game of speculating what's going on. Sometimes it can be they really want to make sure, they may have their clerks looking at every I dotted, T crossed procedurally because they want to make sure they can judge this on the merits of the case and not have to deal with some technical procedural issue that got wrong somewhere. That could be it. It could be, just a lengthy discussion amongst the justices as to whether or not this is something that they should take or not. Obviously, we think they should. I think the Ninth Circuit opinion is vastly overbroad. The Ninth Circuit basically said if you work for government and you engage in any sort of activity that could be deemed religious,
if they even see you,
and people can see you do it.
That's when I just went off the charts.
If they can see you do it, you have spoken on behalf of the government and therefore established an official religion. I mean, the Ninth Circuit basically said Coach Kennedy taking a knee at the 50-yard line after the game because he's wearing a Bremerton ISD jacket, that the neutral observer would assume he's speaking on behalf of the government
I don't even
and therefore has established a religion in violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Of course, our point is you need to keep reading the First Amendment because the next clause is the free exercise clause, and he was clearly not speaking on behalf of the government. He was freely exercising his own religious beliefs. So that was basically what it boiled down to, and what we were asking the court in his case is to bring some clarity and, frankly, some sanity to the Establishment Clause jurisprudence. Justice Thomas, in another case that was denied cert, where we had a split in the circuits on whether or not county commissioners could open commissioners' court with a prayer led by the county commissioner, they denied cert on that one. And Justice Thomas wrote a dissent from denial where he said the first sentence of the opinion is, this court's jurisprudence is in disarray when it comes to the Establishment Clause. And you talk about saying a lot with a few words. He said it all right there. I mean, this case would give them an opportunity to bring some clarity on this issue.
I think so.
I hope that's why they keep listing it, and they're just really thoroughly discussing it, and they're going to grant cert at some point. There's just no way of knowing.
Penna, these are important cases, aren't they?
They are. I wanted to ask, going back to the Bladensburg case, which the Supreme Court did take, I know that First Liberty's model is to get an attorney that would be perhaps local to the area or just the right attorney to give pro bono time to argue the case. Have you decided who will argue this case before the Supreme Court?
Yeah, First Liberty, we've spent Kelly Shackelford and Hiram Sasser and others have spent years building a network of volunteer attorneys around the country in firms all over the country. Now, these are attorneys that work in private practice who then partner with us on the cases, and they donate their time as well so that our clients are never charged for the services. In the Bladensburg case and in Coach Kennedy's case, actually, our partner firm is Jones Day in Washington, D.C., and that is one of the top shops in the country. So I don't know if our volunteer counsel on that case wants me tossing his name out nationwide yet, but that is the firm in D.C. And I could tell you the attorney that we're working with is one of the best in the country. Probably, top five practitioners in this type of law, appellate law, oral argument. He's an all-star.
That's good. Well, we encourage you to pray about those, and there are petitions. There's other petition, we'll get to that maybe another time, Airmont, New York, because we've talked about that with a couple of individuals that have been on the program, but we have one of those mandatory breaks, so we were going to take that. When we come back, we'll get into some of these national stories, not the least of which is, are we going to build a wall or a fence? Is it a fence or a wall? We had a real debate about that between Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump. Will we close down the government? And Nancy Pelosi says, if we have to, we'll close down the government forever. Yeah, I don't think that's happening, but we posted that article too, so you can see we're not making this stuff up. And if you want to learn a little bit more, first about First Liberty, we have a link. You can click on the picture there of Lathan Watts. That will take you there. We'd like to read Penna Dexter's commentary. That's there as well. And many of the articles we're going to be talking about are on the website already at pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today. Penna Dexter, of course, is here so often, and actually next week on one particular occasion will be sitting in this chair covering, since I'll be going to one graduation. Lathan Watts with us as well, again, Director of Community Relations at First Liberty. We'll get into some of those legal issues in just a minute. But Penna, I this week saw that Donald Trump decided, let's bring the cameras in and let's let everybody see how the sausage is made. And it was not necessarily pleasant for some people, but it gave you an idea of where the different ideas were. But one of the reasons I posted this article, Trump's Wall or Is It a Fence?, is I kept hearing back and forth, oh, Mr. President, we don't need a wall, we just need a fence. And I'm going, in my mind, a fence sounds like a picket fence, which isn't going to actually keep anybody out, or a chain link fence, which somebody can climb over. But this is why I thought this piece by Jim Garrity shows a picture, and I'm not in construction, so I didn't know what the difference was, but these are apparently what are called bollard fences, and yes, it is 18 feet high. There are tall steel bars, which allows border control to see through them and to see if anybody's going to climb them. And at the very top, then, there's a part that would make it hard to climb. And I have seen some YouTube videos where they gave a SWAT team, and I think even a SEAL team, the responsibility to try to climb over it. And they didn't do a very good job of it. As a matter of fact, in this article, it talks about a pair of Guatemalan teens actually hurt themselves when they fell off the wall, trying to get across in Yuma. So I've recognized that there are two very intransigent positions right now, two rigid positions, but we could resolve some of this by recognizing that maybe some of it is semantic between the difference between a wall and a fence.
Is it a wall or is it a fence? I think what happened here, and maybe the word transparency is the right word, because we're talking about transparency into the Oval Office to see how, as you said, the sausage is being made. And then with the way this wall is built, in these areas, it's transparency and being able to see who's coming up toward the wall,
yes,
which Border Patrol seem to think is helpful to them. But going back to the Oval Office, it's supposed to be closed to the press, but Trump thought he would open this up, and some different things were said that were kind of interesting. I think for a fact, he said, I'm proud to shut down the wall for border security. And that's certainly, border security is a popular notion. So for him to say, I'll shut down the government for border security, don't throw that as a threat to me. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, later, not in this meeting, but later, Nancy Pelosi said, well, the wall is a manhood thing for him. And,
you just can't make some of this
you
stuff.
Can't. And the idea of a wall is, to some people it's controversial, but it's really not that controversial. A wall is something that's been used by countries to define their borders, to enhance security. And so for it to be so controversial right now is very, very political. And the sides are hardening. And I think that Trump needs to listen to his base, because it's about all he's got right now, and stand firm on this.
Yeah. And I actually heard some other people that I wouldn't necessarily have predicted would say stand firm, but Lindsey Graham 2.0, isn't that the best upper grade you've ever seen in your life? He said he needs to stand firm. But Lathan, I want to get your comments as well, because we had a chance to see sometimes what takes place behind closed doors, and that is there is little movement on either side on this particular issue.
You're right, and it looks like, at least right now, based on that little meeting that was on TV, they want to play chicken, then they're going to play chicken. And who's going to blink first? And I think Trump even mentioned in that meeting to Schumer that you guys shut it down last time and you folded pretty quickly.
Maybe they won't this time because they have nothing to lose. I don't know. But of course, Trump may feel like he has nothing to lose either. I mean, even the House Republicans say, "What are we going to lose? The House? We already did."
Right.
So who knows where this goes?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, if you're arguing over semantics of is this a fence or is it a wall? No, it's a fence. No, it's a wall.
Please.
The average person listening is like, I don't care. Just whatever works.
Yes.
If you can convince me that we can plant a row of sunflowers down there and keep people, who aren't supposed to be here from coming here, then okay, load it up with sunflowers. I don't care. Whatever works.
Right.
And that's where, you listen to the people who are the boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Who are patrolling the border.
Right.
Ask them what they want. Ask them what they need. And like Penna said, people try to make this into a political issue that it really shouldn't be. Walls either keep people in or they keep people out. This is not a wall to keep people in. My guy Reagan's most famous speeches is tear down this wall.
Yeah.
That wall was intended to keep people in. This is you have to know who's coming into your country.
Yeah, the caravan reminded some people that
absolutely.
You do have some people that you don't want in this country coming into this country if you don't make it hard for them.
You have to know who's coming into your country. This is not about just saying throwing a blanket statement over everybody that wants to come to America as somehow, a drug dealer or a human trafficker. But you have to know who's coming. And we're the most welcoming country in the world. We take in more legal immigrants than any other country in the world, to say nothing of how we treat illegal immigrants once they get here. This is an accommodating country. We're just asking you to sign the guest book on the way in. Mm-hmm. That's basically it. Okay. And we have to know who's coming into this country, because if you're coming here to kill us, we don't want you here.
Yeah.
This makes so much sense to the average American. I think that is why Trump is willing to dig in his heels and say, okay, shut it down. I'll be happy. You want to try to blame this on me? I will go to the American people, the people that elected me, and say, you know what? Sorry, the government shut down because they refused to build a wall, the wall that I told you that we needed, the wall that that we need, the wall that anybody who can take an objective look at what's going on at the border and say we need more security at the border knows we need this. I think he sees it as a political win for him either way. Shut down and blame it on me? Okay, yeah. I'll take that. Or you give in and I get the wall? Okay, I'll take that too.
100,000 people in November and December arrested.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Around the wall. And Hugh Hewitt wrote in the Washington Post yesterday about it's not only people, it's drugs coming in. And most people, they may not want to shut down, but they really don't want drugs coming into the country, especially if you look into middle America and the types of people that are Trump supporters. And really, Trump, if you want to go political, he needs the wall to get reelected. He needs to win this battle. And I think he's going to stand on it. The idea of a shutdown it's becoming more and more watered down.
It's becoming more theater. And this would only be a partial one because some of those cabinet offices may remain open. Only some would be shut
down. And it's
down.
going to be Christmas time.
Yeah.
So, sometimes some of these people are off home on vacation anyway. And really, it has to do, who it hurts now is government employees, mostly, many of whom tend to be Democrats and more liberals. So, in a sense, the government shutdown threat is becoming a little bit of a weaker threat, I think, in the minds of Americans. I mean, really, how many people even felt the last government shutdown?
Well, I want to open up the phones, get your comments. Maybe you had a chance to see some of this political theater. Should we shut down the government? Should we build a wall? 1-800-351-1212. Got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the carol O Come, Emmanuel is an English translation of a Latin hymn that was sung during Advent and Christmas. The text goes back to at least the 18th century and perhaps much earlier, while the music goes back to the 15th century. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Emmanuel means God with us. Even before the coming of Christ, we see passages in the Old Testament that remind us that God was with Israel. In 1 Kings 8, we read, Praise the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the wonderful promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us or abandon us. In Psalm 46, we read that the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. One of the most visible reminders of God's presence was during the Exodus. God was with the Israelites as a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day. His presence was with them in the tabernacle and later in the temple in the Holy of Holies. But the most important aspect of Emmanuel is found in the New Testament. John tells us in his gospel, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is the miracle of the incarnation. God put on human flesh and came to Israel so that he might give his life for all of us. Paul writes to Timothy, here is the great mystery of our religion. Christ came as a human. This is what we celebrate at Christmas. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I've already put a couple of issues on the table, but one of those, of course, is it a wall or a fence? And I like what Lathan says. People don't even care if it is going to be effective. But again, Border Control has made it really clear that sometimes when there are gaps between these steel bars, they can see if somebody is coming to them. They can see what's happening on the other side, especially where drugs is coming through or human trafficking. And so that is one of those debates which I thought was kind of silly once I began to understand that. And if you'd like to see what those walls look like, there's a picture right now, but it's also our first article there. That's the first one. But again, this is political. Kind of, you're right. It shouldn't be political, but it is. And so people that like Donald Trump say, good, he's finally going to keep another campaign promise. You know, he's certainly been able to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and he's done a number of other things we like, and we got our tax cut, and now this one that was kind of the biggest promise he's going to do. So people looking at that were excited. People that don't like Trump are saying, yeah, well, it's just his manhood. He's not. He's just simply not going to give in at all. And Nancy Pelosi was really the mom in the room and trying to bring some order in the midst of it. So sometimes people, even when they see those visual images, if nothing else, read into it their political assumptions. So I understand that. So I want to hear some of the comments in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. But it did give us a little bit of a sense of what sometimes happens behind the scenes, and that is digging in. And you might say, well, why is Chuck Schumer digging in so much? I think it is his base, because originally he was willing to spend $1.6 billion, And instead, at that meeting, he said $1.3 billion. And even his base probably was upset that he was offering that. It's like you go to one of those markets in another country. I've done this before. And they say it's $100. And they say, well, I'll give you $50. And they'll say $70. And I'll go $40. And they're going, no, you're supposed to go the other way. And I'll give you $30. I mean, he's actually in the compromise lowering the number. And if that didn't cause some people to go, okay, they really don't seem that serious about compromise. I think Americans would like compromise. I think Americans would like to get something done. But when you see that the person who's supposed to be negotiating with supposedly the chief negotiator, Donald Trump, and they go the other direction, you kind of wonder how serious they are about all of that.
Well, this article by Jim Garrity points out that back in January, the Senate Democrats were willing to actually fund the wall to the tune of $20 billion.
Yes.
And but there was a compromise that there would have been 700,000 young undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants.
They tied the two together, yeah.
That they were the DACA people that would have been legalized. And so, that would have been a deal. And the Trump administration had actually said they were willing to do that, and then they backed away. So that one kind of fell through and didn't happen. So we do know that it's a bit of a political football, but I think now the president feels that this is probably his last chance to get the wall funding.
Yeah.
If they don't do it now, it's going to become too close to the election, the 2020 election. And so I think he needs to dig his heels in. I saw one big conservative group of leaders send, their strong encouragement to the president to stand firm on this. And so, this may be a time to weigh in.
Well, the argument is that once Democrats take over control of the House, probably not going to happen. So some people are saying, well, why now? Well, there were some other issues to deal with first. And if you remember this time last year, we were talking about tax cuts. And those have worked pretty well. But now I guess the argument is if I don't do it now, I may never do it. And that's an important issue, too. So we'll see where that goes. Let's take some phone calls. We'll go to Texas, KAVX. Josh, what's your question for us today?
Thank you for taking my call. I'll ask my question, and then I will hang up and listen on the radio.
Sure. Thank you.
Driving in the rain. So my question is this. If what appears to be keeping our president from getting the wall built is funding, in your opinion, would the wall get built if, say, by some miraculous chance, the American people rallied through a series of fundraisers and produced the money needed for the wall?
Yeah, and I've heard people talk about like a GoFundMe kind of campaign. Let me talk about that, Josh. Since you're driving in the rain, and I understand right now there's some pretty significant storms, so I want to let him listen on the radio. First of all, if you remember one of the other quotes, he says, now, if you don't give me this or the military, and you go, what was the military? It turns out that he's already got some money in the military budget, the Pentagon budget, that is not earmarked. There's a value in earmarks and a disadvantage in earmarks. And so the argument he could make is, if you don't give me the money, I'll just use the money in the Pentagon and I can still build it. So in some respects, he's really got the higher hand. When you play poker, when you got a good hand, he knows he's got a good hand. Because he knows that if you say no, I'm going to make you look terrible. I'm going to make you force us to shut down the government. I'm going to blame, I'll take the blame for it, but I'm going to blame you ultimately for it. And then I'm going to fund it anyway because I have the argument that unless you, and there's probably some federal judge out there, so we'll get Lathan to talk about that in just a minute, that would say, no, putting a wall up is not part of national security. I'd like to see somebody try to argue against that.
Especially after the caravans.
Yeah, after that. So there is a sense in which that could actually happen. One of our next callers wants to talk about whether Mexico funds that, but we'll get to the first. But could it be possible that the people of the United States fund it? Yeah, possibly. I just don't know how that happens because then you'd have to have the government sanction, I guess, independent contractors to put it up. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how it happens.
Maybe some of the border states would put up money.
Put up some of the money.
Texas has put up money for border security before.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is the people of the United States of America are paying for it.
Yes.
Because we pay enough in taxes to fund this tomorrow. I mean, the argument over, I mean, the fact that they just throw around numbers like, well, I'll give you $1.5 billion. No, I want $5 billion. You know, it's like, well, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. I mean, it's ludicrous.
These are rounding errors in the federal government. This is $1.5 trillion budget. These are rounding errors.
You don't need a GoFundMe page.
Yeah.
You have the IRS.
Yeah.
Yes, we got a tax cut, and guess what?
We have
more money in the Treasury.
Than ever.
We set
a record in the first month of the fiscal year, October. More money than ever in the history.
It is typical D.C. Political smoke blowing to say that, well, we need more money for the wall. The answer in D.C. to everything is always, well, if we had more money, we'd do this. If we had more money, we could do that. And I know you got a caller who says, is Mexico going to pay for this? I mean, just like you said, if it's $5 billion to build this wall, that's a rounding error in our foreign aid budget. You want to cut $5 billion from how much, or however much we give to Mexico and Latin America? See how much we give to the countries between the Mexican border and South America.
Yeah,
and there is money right there to build that wall.
Yeah,
and if he's got funds in the Pentagon budget that haven't been earmarked for other projects, he can start the Corps of Engineers building that tomorrow if he wants. I think sometimes he himself even gets caught up a little bit in the political back and forth.
Yeah, I think he forgets.
You really want to do this? Just do it.
Yeah, he's holding the cards, and sometimes he forgets he's holding the cards, and I think that's the case. But Garla in California, KYCC, I think you have the question that I was already alluding to, but I wanted to give you a chance to ask that question. Go for it.
Well, thank you so much for taking my call, and I must confess total ignorance to this kind of stuff, but I do wonder why we have to foot the bill for that wall when we do so much for everyone on the globe, it seems. And is perchance there companies from America that have gone down there to Mexico for cheaper wages for those people and left us high and dry without jobs? Is that one way? And I don't know which companies these would be. And I do have compassion on these folks trying to be Americans, but at the same time, if they do it the right way, then God be praised. But if they have tunnels and they have weapons and bring bad elements into our country, we have to be reasonable and protect ourselves.
I would agree. I got to go to a break, but I think when we come back, we'll talk about that, because a lot of people have said, well, the only choices we have are no wall or a lot of a wall. And first of all, he's not talking about a wall over the entire southern border. I've got an idea. How about a wall with a door and a guest book, kind of like you were talking about, Check in with us, and if we want you here, we're a welcoming country. We allow more than 1 million people to come in every single year, and we probably let in more if they weren't sneaking in illegally. We'll talk about that right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. We're going to continue talking a little bit about the wall and about a possible government shutdown. Let me just mention the second article here is where incoming speaker, at least presumptive speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, says she'll shut down the government forever to stop Trump from building the border wall. So you can see,
a Democrat shutting down the government forever
is amazing. And we do have a number of phone calls here. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And again, your perspective would be helpful. This piece that just came out today by Ted Budd, I'll maybe put it on our list for Monday, but I thought it was interesting because it reminded us of what Penna said just a few minutes ago, that more than 100,000 people in October and again another 100,000 people in November tried to cross the border. So when you say, well, I don't really think we need a wall, really? And then it talks about some of the other issues here. Catch and release is, they say, the natural result of a series of loopholes in the current U.S. asylum laws that encourage law breaking. I often jokingly have said, as a fly fisherman, catch and release I like, but catch and release for immigration is not a very good idea. And it also goes on to talk about how illegal immigrants have been able to game the system. And so we may get back into that on Monday, but I just found that article, and maybe we'll post it on Monday. But let's take a couple of phone calls here as well, because if you have any comments or questions, we would certainly love to hear from you. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us, and let's go to Adam in South Carolina. Adam,
Hello,
you there?
Thank you for taking.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I just heard previously that you said there's more money in the Treasury than ever. So my question would be in relation to that: would it make sense to use any of that money to pay down the national debt, and why or why not?
Okay, first of all, yes, we had more money come in the month of October. We'll get the November figures in just a minute. More money than ever compared to even last October, which was a record. So right now, as we're into the new fiscal year, the fiscal year for the government starts September 30th or October 1st. So we only have 1 month, but we will probably, I'll make an easy prediction that in November it will be higher because the tax cuts have, even though the tax rates went down, the revenue has gone up. Oh, what a concept. Sounds like Reaganomics or something, but nevertheless, okay. But the bottom line is, of course, you've got to recognize the incoming speaker, Nancy Pelosi, says she wants to repeal those tax cuts. Now, I would think, Lathan, if I'm a Democrat and I want to have money to spend for all these additional programs that some of my Democratic candidates ran for, I would be grateful to have the increased revenue, but it sounds to me like she wants to kill the goose that laid the golden egg and repeal all of the Republican tax cuts.
Well, right. I mean, your premise is flawed because you said if I was a Democrat and I thought, when talking about Nancy Pelosi, yeah, she absolutely will repeal those if she can. Because to her, a political victory of getting rid of something the Republicans did is more important to her than anything else.
Ideology over economics, I guess.
Absolutely. And she will use that new revenue that's there to spend on every liberal utopian idea that she can come up with, while at the same time repealing the tax cuts that gave that Treasury, because she's not bound by any sort of intellectual honesty or ideological consistency. But to the point about the debt, this sort of really went unnoticed. I think maybe a month or two ago, Trump asked every cabinet secretary to turn in a plan to reduce their budget by 5%.
5%. And I think that's something I've never heard.
That would
I
be
don't even
huge.
know. I don't think I even heard Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush say something like that. Go ahead.
If they were able to do that, that would be an enormous achievement.
Yeah.
I mean, there had been plans try to go through Congress multiple times where they were asking for a 1% reduction.
Right.
That, look, if you just reduce an actual reduction, not a reduction in the rate of increase, which people like to call, hey, we cut spending. No, you didn't. You're spending more than you did the year before. You're just spending less.
Only in Washington, D.C., you spend more every year than the year before you get a cut.
And you call it a cut, right?
I know.
So these are actual
nuts.
reductions in spending is what we're talking about. And I think it was. I'll get the congressman's name wrong, but there was a 1% plan. Like the
penny plan is one of them.
The penny plan.
Penny plan. I know who you're talking about.
1% reduction over a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
You
balance the budget.
You balance the budget and you bring the debt down. And this, what Trump asked for was a 5% reduction. That would be a really a historic achievement if he's able to do that. The last president we had that left office with a budget and a federal workforce smaller than he came into office with was Calvin Coolidge.
Calvin Coolidge. Wow. I knew you were going to say that.
Because he's one of my favorites, and that's why he's one of my favorites.
Even when we so-called balanced the budget in the 1990s, really, we were stealing out of Social Security. So I'll give credit where credit was due. You had Bill Clinton as president, you had Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House, and you came the closest in modern times to something of a balanced budget, but it still wasn't truly balanced, right? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there are things that would seem simple to us that for whatever reason within the logic-free zone of Washington, D.C. become very complicated, which is if the money is for Social Security, don't spend it somewhere else.
Yeah. And if you bring in more money in October than you expect, I would want to put every dime of that, back to what Adam's saying, towards paying off the national debt.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, conservatives talk a lot about...
Well, the other logical is cut spending. Right? If you're going to lower taxes, cut spending too.
Yeah.
Right,
Don't
which is
raise
where
spending.
the budget cuts that Trump is asking for would come in.
And remember
very,
the
very
funeral
handy.
of George Herbert Walker Bush, they got upset with him because he decided to raise taxes, but he was promised they would cut spending. Well, they raised taxes, but they didn't cut spending. Mm-hmm. And here you have something that you've never had in modern times, and that is where you've had unprecedented income coming in. And you have had some of those a few times under Reagan and under Clinton, but you also have a desire, at least, to cut spending. Now, Ronald Reagan desired to cut spending, and it never happened. George Herbert Walker Bush desired to cut spending. I'm not sure Bill Clinton ever saw a cut in any kind of spending he wanted to spend, but this is an unusual time. So back to Adam's point, that's a good idea if you could get some people in Congress and even in the Bush, now the Trump White House to do what the Bush White House wanted to actually take place.
And, of course, we're in the lame duck session, which is the last opportunity for that.
Yeah, good point. Well, we've got a lot more that would like to weigh in with their comments, so we want to hear from you. So in Indiana, Larry, what's your point of view?
Well, my point, thank you for taking the call. My point of view is this. I think it should be looked at as a national defense problem as well as a national health problem.
Yes.
A national emergency because we know that at the very early stages of this caravan controversy that there were 100 terrorists caught in Central America. We know that in the midst of this, after the caravan got to the border, there were 10. Also, and that's reported by the Mexican government. Also, in the combination of tuberculosis, chickenpox, undiagnosed conditions of the people coming in. To let those in would be absolutely atrocious. The comment you made about the covering the cost of the wall,
Mm-hmm.
in 18 months by going in by spending the money now to build the wall. It should take a number of years, but within 18 months of that wall being completed, we would have recouped enough money in the to pay for it in the terms of health care costs, education costs in the judicial system for these individuals, and so it would be recouped within 18 months anyway.
I think so. You almost see it like an investment. And again, I don't want to overplay the health issue, but he did mention that. My grandfather, was a doctor, and, he dealt with diseases that modern doctors have never seen. But now they're starting to see him again, whooping cough and cholera and smallpox. Now, not many, but, it's one of the reasons why when people came over here on a boat, they went first to what? Ellis Island. Yes.
They got a medical checkup.
Yeah, and got a medical checkup. And when people just cross the border, some of whom have never been vaccinated and maybe actually are carriers for certain kind of diseases. I don't want to overplay that because sometimes the liberals say, oh, you're just suggesting that every one of these people is a terrorist. No, I'm not suggesting that. And I'm not suggesting that everybody crosses the border from some of these countries actually is carrying a disease. But are some? Yes. And that seems to be missing from the debate. So I appreciate Larry bringing that up. And I got a few more calls, so let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll take some of those. But then we also want to kind of look ahead. There is going to be a new chief of staff for President Donald Trump. And at first we thought it might be the chief of staff for Mike Pence, but he decided he wanted to go back and be with his kids. Understand that? So who are the odds-on favorites? And one of those is with the Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows. So we're going to talk about that too. But we'll take a few more calls if you have them on the wall and the fence. The next hour, we're also going to get into some other issues as well. The Supreme Court decided not to take certain cases, and we're going to talk about that in terms of Planned Parenthood. We'll also get an update on some cases that the Supreme Court has taken. One in particular relates to First Liberty, the Bladensburg Cross. So we've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Feminist writer and podcaster named Megan Murphy recently had her Twitter account suspended due, she thinks, to her observation that, quote, men aren't women. The notice from Twitter said this was hate speech. This reveals the conflict between two ideologies of the left, feminism and transgenderism. Ms. Murphy maintains that the transgender ideology undermines feminism because feminism depends upon femaleness being a real gender category. If men can be women, then what is feminism? The first iteration of feminism celebrated the differences between men and women and sought rights for women in light of those differences. But when feminism moved into its radical second wave in the 1960s, there was this attempt to deconstruct gender. Radical feminists would not tolerate references to differences between men and women. They insisted upon sexual parity in all discussions. At the same time, they sought the advancement of women. The transgender moment we're in is a very uncomfortable one for the feminist who maintains this kind of thinking. It's pretty tough to reconcile the push for opportunities and rights for women with the idea that gender is fluid and men can be women. The feminist movement can celebrate real accomplishments in fields like women's sports, but the transgender movement mitigates the good in this by insisting that biological males be allowed to participate. In a commentary, John Stonestreet of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview asks the question, are women real? If men can be women, then this is a fair question. John Stonestreet suggests that feminists and progressives consider the principle outlined in the book of Genesis, that there is a difference between sexes, and this is an intrinsic and good feature of human nature that together magnifies the divine image which both men and women bear. Radical feminism's logical successor is transgender ideology. Some feminists, like Megan Murphy, are beginning to realize the two cannot coexist. Christians can show them a better way. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us, and he, of course, is with First Liberty Institute. Let's take another phone call or two, and we'll go to Ohio. Sheldon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your program. I wanted to say, first of all, I think it's horrible when the government can come up with $150 billion to give to Iran, which is a questionable country, but we will not secure our borders for $5 billion. And like the previous caller said, I was going to mention how the wall is going to be paid for. Social services that they're receiving cost us bunches of money.
Yep.
And the new trade deal between Canada and the U.S. is going to bring in money. So eventually, yeah, it'll be paid for.
And I wouldn't be surprised if
another
Mexico indirectly ends up paying for it because we send less money in foreign aid to Mexico, or a variety of other things that are going to come out of it as well. But we'll see.
Correct. And not to mention, when you have illegal immigrants killing American people, they're American people being killed, but they don't mention it. A lot of your news channels will not mention one good thing, just like there was a deal signed yesterday with President Trump that's going to help build the minority areas that have been broken down by the past governments.
So again, you've got some good points, and we will probably get back to some of those a little bit later in the next hour. But as a matter of fact, the next caller, I think, gets us into another topic that we want to put on the table, which we were planning to do so. And we'll go to Missouri. Randy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Hey, I wanted to chime in on the Planned Parenthood case that was refused by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Some folks were observing that Judge Kavanaugh did not vote for it, and I don't know why everybody's surprised, because during the confirmations hearings, he told Susan Collins that he believed not only in the precedent of Roe v. Wade, but that it had been ruled on twice. So once by the Casey decision and once by the Roe v. Wade, and that there was double precedent. So I don't think we should have been surprised at his refusal for the case at all. But since Roe v. Wade wasn't in jeopardy, it seems like they were covering for Planned Parenthood so that the issue of baby parts trafficking and the fact that they were profiting off of those baby parts and that their tax exemption was probably in jeopardy, and they did not want that issue dealt with. The court didn't want anything to do with it.
I might just mention our third article is entitled Supreme Court's Dodge, and it's the editorial by the Wall Street Journal. But, okay, first of all, we've been telling everybody, Lathan, that it takes 4 to take a case, 5 to win. Mm-hmm. Kelly Shackelford has been telling us that really this is the first time where we've had 5 conservative justices since the 1920s, is at least his argument. And so you just either had to have either John Roberts or one or two other individuals to go along with that. But instead, Brett Kavanaugh is held out as the one that did not take it. What's going on? Any thoughts? Again, trying to read the tea leaves is really difficult, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, this is all going to be 100% speculation because nobody knows what happened in that room. But I do think, just to sort of clarify a little bit, I mean, the case that was involved had nothing to do with the merits of Roe v. Wade. I mean, the case was basically a split in the circuits where you had, is there a cause of action? It would have impacted states putting restrictions on Medicaid funding, and where it can go and where it can't go.
So in a sense, it can't go. Planned Parenthood is the issue that everyone's talking about because they provide abortions, and a lot of states don't want their Medicaid money going to Planned Parenthood.
Right.
And it is a split. And when it's a split, usually that's when the Supreme Court jumps in. But sometimes they don't jump in because they are waiting for another case. So it's a possibility.
That's a possibility.
Because you have both John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh, because either one of them would have been the other fourth, right? Because you have 3. Clarence Thomas did have a few things to say about it, didn't he?
He did, yes. And it's hard
don't
for me.
Don't you love Clarence Thomas? My goodness.
It's hard for me. You can't overstate the brilliance of Justice Thomas for the same reason you cannot overstate infinity.
Yeah.
The man is just a national treasure.
And when he writes these dissents, I mean, they're as fun to read as a Lathan Watts article.
They're much better than a Lathan Watts article.
You got some great one-liners, and he's got some great one-liners. One of the reasons I always love having you on is because, you've got that kind of that sense of humor. And you can sometimes be reading Clarence Thomas and laugh out loud.
Absolutely.
Which is pretty not the case for most justices,
Absolutely.
right?
He and the late Justice Scalia were the absolute best at it.
Oh, yes.
But you're right. He descended from denial in this case, and he made a point in the dissent that and he was sort of speculating. He's like, I don't know if this is really what's going on here, is that we didn't take this case just because it sort of tangentially touches controversial issue of abortion. And if that's the case, we really made a mistake because we're supposed to be independent of that. This is supposed to be, a politically independent branch of the government. The politics of things are not supposed to enter into what we do here. And if this is the reason we didn't take this case, then we have made a serious error. Mm-hmm. And he's correct once again, if that's the case. Now, like we said,
is it Brett Kavanaugh who's showing that he's not going to ever want to overturn Roe versus Wade, or is it Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts saying, I just don't want to get into something this political right now? I mean, or what? You just don't know.
We don't know.
And you don't know.
That.
You don't know.
They're sitting in a room talking about this by themselves.
Yes.
And when it comes down to vote on whether or not to take the last thing you want to do is vote to take the case, and then
it's going to lose,
and it goes, creates a new precedent that's even worse than the current situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one scenario is they're discussing this case, and Kavanaugh listens to some of the conversation, maybe a comment that comes out of Chief Justice Roberts' case, and gives him some reason to think, would Roberts go? I don't know if Roberts would go with me on this. So I don't want to take this case if I don't know how this is going to come out.
Yeah.
That could be a reason to withhold your vote. We've talked about this before when Kavanaugh was confirmed, how a lot of people thought that Roberts had withheld his vote for cert on cases because he could not predict the way Kennedy was going to go. And he didn't want to give an opportunity, for a bad precedent to be established with another bad opinion. So there's no way of knowing. It makes for great conversation, and it's fun to talk about, and legal nerds like me like to talk about stuff like this. But there's really only those 9 people were in that room when they discussed this and when that vote was taken.
And they could come back to a case like this again, and probably
that issue's
not
going away.
Because back to the key issue before we take a break is when you have a split in the circuits. You have 11 different circuit courts, and some, as you had in a situation, said you could pray before a city council meeting. Others say you cannot. The Supreme Court has to take the case. Well, the Supreme Court didn't take your case this time, but it may take it in the future. And this case is, again, one where you have a split in the circuit, so maybe they don't take it this time, but maybe they take it in the future. Nothing else. I want to encourage people to pray for the cases you do have before the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
Coach Kennedy is a good example of that. And frankly, now, given the construction of the courts, when your case out of Oregon, in terms of the bakery, comes there, I think you're in much better situation than the ADF was with Jack Phillips' case a year ago.
I hope so. With this court, with Kavanaugh being there instead of Kennedy
and Gorsuch,
and Gorsuch, right? Aaron and Melissa Klein, our clients in Oregon, a very similar circumstance to what happened in Colorado, with a few key differences. So we're hoping. We've appealed to the Supreme Court. We hope they'll take that case as a way to settle the much bigger question that Kennedy dodged in Masterpiece.
We need to take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us. We're going to get into some of the judicial issues a little bit later. Also, of course, we have the contenders for the chief of staff, who is going to be stepping down for Donald Trump, and we'll talk about that. Also, I posted a piece by Cal Thomas on the fury of the establishment. Just gives you an idea of one more challenge that this White House is facing. So let's, if we can, pick up just one phone call from the last hour, since we were talking about the subject of the wall and immigration. Cindy, thank you for being patient. I think you have some kind of testimony about immigration, calling in from Missouri today.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for taking my call. And, my grandfather came from Sicily. I'm only the second generation born here. And when my grandfather came here, first of all, he had to have a job waiting on him. He had to have a sponsor, and he had to learn the American language and somewhat the history. Nowadays, it seems like almost anybody can come in. As soon as they touch land, it's okay. And I don't think it's right. Plus, I agree with the president. I think the wall should go up, and I think it should go twice as high. Serious. I mean, we don't have that much room. I mean, the Statue of Liberty says, bring in the poor and everything else, but I mean, it comes a time where we have to close our doors, and if we can build a dome around us, I think we should do that.
Yeah, well, it's not going to happen, but it is interesting that Gallup does a world poll every once in a while, and they just came out with one the other day, and they concluded that at least 750 million. In other words, twice the population of America right now would like to come to America.
Mm-hmm.
And
everybody can't come, but I will say we have very low unemployment now. We actually need workers in many fields.
We just need the right ones. Yeah.
We need to be able to choose as a country who comes in and who doesn't. And that is impossible when you allow everyone to come in, or when you have people trying to come in illegally. If people had, we have a lot of legal immigration going on in our country, and it benefits our country, benefits the people that come. But when so many are coming and are encouraged to come illegally, as in this, and all at once, as in these caravans, this is forcing us to take action that, we probably should have taken anyway, but it's an opportune moment to take it when we see the threat. And then, then we can be that country that we really are. We take in more immigrants than any others. We benefit from that. But I think we're in a situation now where we have to be able to choose who comes in and who doesn't. And we also have to ask them to try to become Americans, just to learn our language,
assimilation,
to learn to live in our country. And so that we know, another part of this is we really can't afford, people can come in that want opportunity that are poor, but we can't afford people coming in that just want to come in and live on the dole and not improve themselves and create some sort of opportunity for themselves to earn and not be dependent upon our largesse.
Well, again, I remember Milton Friedman used to say that you can have open borders or you can have a welfare state, but you cannot have both, right?
That's exactly right.
Lathan?
And I think one thing to just sort of keep in mind on the conversation about the border and the wall is that it's not a magic bullet. It is one part of a much bigger
problem.
And I think we have to do that first. I think it's the first part because you have to get control of that border and know who is coming here and why they're coming. But it has to be step one in a bigger process of reforming the way we deal with immigration legally and illegally. Because if our system as is incentivizing the wrong type of behavior,
right?
Just get here any way you can get here. Then that whatever within that system that is encouraging and incentivizing the wrong type of behavior needs to be reformed, and so that it incentivizes the right type of behavior, which is sign the guest book, come on in, come in legally, tell us who you are, where you're coming from, why you want to be here, and as Penna said, we need people who want to be Americans, not just to benefit by living in America. And there's a major difference between those two. I'm convinced there are Americans living all over the world. There are people all over the world who understand the concept of natural law and individual rights and responsibilities and God-given rights and the role of government, and they see what's going on here and they say, that is it. That is my country. That is my home. If that's who you are out there, you do it legally and welcome home. But if it's just about, as she alluded to, living at a higher standard because the standard of poverty in America is better than the one that you're in, that's not what our immigration system is for.
No.
Just like you said, I mean, we agree, I think, by most objective standards, this is the best country in the world to live in. But the whole world can't live in this country. And so we need people that want to become Americans, not just benefit by living in America.
You know, we also talked about learning the language, learning the English language, learning our history. This is the interesting irony, Penna, because I talked about this a couple of weeks ago in one of my commentaries, that individuals that come to this country and go through citizenship rules and actually passed the citizenship test actually know a lot more about America than the natural-born Americans. I mean, I think it was less than a third of those under the age of 45 could pass the citizenship test for America. And when I look at the fact that you don't even have to get a 70, which is what used to be a passing grade at least in the schools I went to, Lathan, probably the schools you went to, you realize this is pathetic. So we're in a situation where those who really desire, as Lathan talks about, who believe in natural law, believe in our history, believe in our government, and have passed the citizenship test, may actually be better citizens and might actually be voting more intelligently than some of the people born here.
Well, let them be an encouragement to us then.
Yeah.
I have friends who have become citizens who have done exactly that.
Yes.
They've helped me learn things because they've just learned it.
Yeah. And again, I've had an argument for that since we have so many young people that could not pass the citizenship test, I have a solution. And a couple states have done this now. In order to graduate from high school, you have to be able to pass the citizenship test. Well, that would because we talk about teachers teaching to the test. I don't know what they're teaching, but if these individuals are graduated from high school and they just can't even tell you what the three branches of government are, although I do think we have an incoming congressional candidate that seemed to have a little trouble with that, but nevertheless, then, we've got a problem. And if you don't know how many justices are on the Supreme Court, and you don't know how a bill is made law, well, and then you're going to get out there and vote. I'm more concerned sometimes about some of our people that have been born here and have resisted learning anything about this country than some of those outstanding citizens that actually were naturalized. So it's something
they
else
may have
to put in.
resisted, or the schools just aren't teaching it.
Yeah, somewhere there's a problem. Either they weren't being taught or they weren't listening, and it may be a little of both. But anyway, I just thought I'd put that on the table. We come back, though, we certainly want to get into the contenders for the chief of staff. And if nothing else, that gives us a little bit of an inner working on what it's like to live in Washington, D.C., to actually be in the Oval Office and the Executive Office building, and what it's like to work for Donald Trump. So we got a lot to cover there, and then we're going to get, of course, Lathan to give us an update on some of these Supreme Court cases that we need to know about. So we got a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the carol, O Come, Emmanuel, is an English translation of a Latin hymn that was sung during Advent and Christmas. The text goes back to at least the 18th century and perhaps much earlier, while the music goes back to the 15th century. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Emmanuel means God with us. Even before the coming of Christ, we see passages in the Old Testament that remind us that God was with Israel. In 1 Kings 8, we read, Praise the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the wonderful promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us or abandon us. In Psalm 46, we read that the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. One of the most visible reminders of God's presence was during the Exodus. God was with the Israelites as a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day. His presence was with them in the tabernacle and later in the temple in the Holy of Holies. But the most important aspect of Emmanuel is found in the New Testament. John tells us in his gospel, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is the miracle of the incarnation. God put on human flesh and came to Israel so that he might give his life for all of us. Paul writes to Timothy, Here is the great mystery of our religion. Christ came as a human. This is what we celebrate at Christmas. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A lot more to cover today, and we're going to do so. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. One of the articles, I think, would be, the fifth article down the page, is the contenders for chief of staff. And I thought we would talk about this for a minute because we don't spend a lot of time here on Point of View talking about who's up and who's down in the cabinet. But I thought this particular article that Penna sent to me from Daily Signal was really good because it, first of all, lets you understand that you've got some potential contenders there or even some wild card for these individuals to be chief of staff. And Penna, let's just talk about that. If you want to actually get some FaceTime with the President of the United States, you've got to go through the Chief of Staff. And so that Chief of Staff can really determine a lot about policy and who has access to the President and ultimately indirectly affect the kind of policy that we live under every day.
Yeah, and part of the job of the Chief of Staff is to deal with Congress in some ways and to understand Congress and help the President navigate the Congress. And then, in Kelly, he was refreshing when he came in because he did provide some discipline to President Trump and to really that White House. And so in a sense, he played a really good role. And a lot of times chiefs of staff do not stay very long. And people predicted that he would be gone by now, so that he's perhaps stayed even longer than some people expected. But now, this president really chafes under that type of thing. So he had respect for General Kelly, but that that ship has sailed. That's gone. There's going to be a new one. So who do we get now? And the Heritage Foundation did a good job of sort of talking about the pros and cons of some of them. They didn't include everyone who's been floated, because I think some of them have been floated since, like Newt Gingrich. We've heard that name. And Chris Christie, and now he's said that he talked to the president. He's out. But one of them that was talked about this week was somebody that we've interviewed here on Point of View, Mark Meadows. He's a fairly new member of Congress, but he's risen to be the head of the Freedom Caucus, and he's developed a good relationship with the president. So, I looked at it and I said, well, I really like him in the Freedom Caucus, but that whole idea of dealing with Congress, I mean, he's learned to know Congress in his short time there, so he might be good in that sense. And, he's become known as a pretty bold guy that can stand up to the president on some things. So maybe he's the right one. I don't know. There are more. Mick Mulvaney was one that was, he's a very talented guy. He's head of OMB, and also he's actually got 2 jobs right now. He's also in the Consumer Financial Board. He heads that up too, at least temporarily. But he said pretty much that he doesn't want it, although I think if they force the issue, perhaps. Stephen Mnuchin at Treasury was another one floated this week, and I'm not hearing as much about him lately, and I don't know that he necessarily wants it. Robert Leitner, trade representative, who has pushed the tariffs and things like that. That's another one that's up. So David Bossie, who was big on getting Trump elected, and
conservative,
very conservative, talented guy, makes things happen. So.
Lathan, let me come to you. But if you had told me 5 years ago, first of all, Donald Trump would be president, I wouldn't have believed it. But if you then told me he would be the most conservative president, that he would actually put on originalist justices on the court, that he'd be the most pro-life president, and now that 2 of the individuals that would be candidates for the chief of staff would be the head of the Freedom Caucus or the head of one of the most outstanding conservative organizations in the country, I would have said, you are lost your mind. And that is something I did not see, given the fact that we used to think of this president, Donald Trump, as the New York playboy, and not exactly a person who would be even that sympathetic to conservative ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a surprise every day. You just don't know when you wake up every morning what's coming next. But I do think, Trump likes to paint himself as an outsider and not a politician, but he does have some really good political instincts. And I think he did truly understand the base of the conservative movement that was going to be what elected him. And I think that's why you see names like Mark Meadows float up. He knows who elected him, and he knows they like this guy.
Right.
He knows who elected him, and I know they like this guy. But this is a job that, I think it's Will Rogers, when talking about the president, he said anybody who wants that job ought to be prevented from having it. Chief of staff to the president sort of falls in that same category.
Yes, it does.
If you're concerned about being popular, this is not the job for you. I mean, this is the chief gatekeeper. And this guy
says no all the time
to
people that have never had somebody say no to them.
Exactly.
In their whole life.
You're saying no to a lot of people, and to a lot of people who don't like to hear the word no, and chief among them is the president of the United States.
Yes.
Because not only are you saying no to people trying to get to him, but if you're doing this job correctly, occasionally you're saying no to the president.
No president, you should not meet with them. Or
exactly.
That's not a fundraising event that you need to do or whatever. Yeah,
right.
That's true.
Or control yourself on Twitter.
Yeah,
right. Right. And this president, like all, and probably to a greater degree, doesn't like being handled, doesn't like being managed. I've had opportunity to be around some political figures, and I can tell you there are some that if you handle them well to where they don't know that they're being handled, everything is great.
Yeah.
The moment they feel like they are being handled, they will do the exact opposite of whatever it is that you were trying to get.
Human nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a remarkable job, and that's why people don't do it very long.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 24 hours in a day, and I don't know when the chief of staff sleeps.
Oh, I don't either.
So it's a tough gig.
I think this is particularly important right now because, and it's probably the reason why you've had a lot of people say no already. because the White House is heading into a challenging time because the Democrats have now got the House. There could be all kinds of, more investigation that will affect the president. I mean, some people have said impeachment is a possibility, and the Mueller investigation is closing in at this time, and so you need. Somebody said a wartime consigliere, and Craig Shirley, who's watched these things forever and ever since the Reagan administration, said Trump should pick somebody he will listen to. That's not a possibility.
That's not a possibility.
Because maybe he will for a while, but he really, I think, would like to be his own chief of staff or have maybe his daughter be his chief of staff. But he needs one. He needs to be able to navigate the rough waters that are ahead. And so picking the right guy is pretty important right now.
I heard this morning on the radio, and I forget who was speculating, but they threw out Jared Kushner's name.
Yeah, I did see that too. Yes.
And,
but then you got family.
Exactly.
It's just you got to have.
You can
somebody.
fire your chief of staff. You cannot fire your son-in-law.
Yeah, that is tough.
He's still going to be son-in-law. He's still going to be there at the family Christmas dinner and Thanksgiving and everything else.
That didn't make sense to me.
No, me either. But Penna's point is a good one that he needs to, if he's going to have somebody in this position, it's got to be somebody that he will listen to, somebody that he trusts enough, who will listen, who he will take advice from. And the best advisor is the one will protect you from everybody else, but the one you really want is the guy who's willing to protect you from yourself.
Yeah.
And
that would be hard as a son-in-law too.
Yeah,
exactly.
That would be tough. Would be tough. You mentioned Craig Shirley. He's been on the program with us before, kind of talking about some of the history, but it's just fascinating to see how the inner workings of any White House, but especially the Trump White House, is pretty crazy. And back to your point is, I really do not know when these people sleep. Even if you've ever watched the fictional TV show called West Wing, and they gave you a sense about did any of these people ever sleep? Because it's sometimes an 18-hour day. And if you have ever lived in Washington, D.C., and I've lived outside of it, just even trying to get to a place where you can put your head down for a few hours takes a lot of time. And it's like you just don't get any sleep. And I just think this is why, after a while, people get totally worn out. If for no other reason, they're not getting any sleep. And they're really engaged in sometimes major verbal confrontations with individuals who are not used to being told no and say that they desperately need to meet with the president for 15 minutes and it's not in the schedule.
Right. And, the person who does this job has to be a really good administrator. I mean, the
organizing a lot of people.
Apparatus around the president. I mean, the number of people that are working in his
executive office building alone.
If you don't have somebody who can keep the trains running on time to make sure the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, you are heading for a disaster. And so finding that somebody who is a very good administrator, who also has the political skills to sort of navigate the political waters with Congress, especially this Congress that's about to come in, who wants nothing but to attack this president every day. That's a tough resume to find.
Yeah, and can imagine being the press secretary, given the fact that there's pretty good odds that the House will try to impeach the president. We've got some phone calls, so we'll take some of those, but we have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team. or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and again, he is the Director of Community Relations. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court in just a minute, but I got a call left over as we were talking about just some of the ignorance that many Americans have. And as I've said before, sometimes those that are naturalized citizens know more about our history and our government than others. Nancy in Texas wanted to weigh in with some of her comments. So, Nancy, what would you like to share with us?
Yes, I am from El Paso, so I'm right on the border. And I retired officially about 8 years ago, and I taught ESL, and I taught a lot of people English and history. And this was my teaching field, was Texas and U.S. history in middle school.
Yes.
And so one of the ladies in my ESL class was from Cuba, about 35 years old at one of the elementary schools. And she had a great question. What is this on the dollar bill on the left-hand side on the front? How come they're different letters? And I looked at her like, I don't know. So I had extra 8.5 by 11 paper. Everybody got one. I made it example U.S., put in the Mississippi about where it would be. And we made a list of everybody's, what they had on their dollar bills. And we were missing letter I, the missing letter I. Well, one of the ladies that worked in the office, whose husband was in my class, had to pick up his sister-in-law up in Minneapolis, and that is letter I country. So he brought a bunch back for the class, and we learned the geography, and we realized that most of those big federal reserves are on the right of the Mississippi, not on the left, and we made up a listing and what is famous about each city. Well, what's been so interesting, I only did that 1 year, and then I did substitute teaching, which I've still taught the kids. But many people that I go up to, whether they're at Wells Fargo or my Teachers Credit Union or Wendy's or Chick-fil-A, hey, look at these. Do you know anything about A, B, and C? And I always teach A, B, and C because it's history. I haven't been to all those countries or all those cities, but I have been to New York. Anyway, letter A, I said, who gave the British the hardest time of the early American history in 1775? Most people don't know. I said, how about the Tea Party, where they dumped the tea in the area? No, nobody knows. Boston Tea Party. Oh, I knew that. Then I tell them, what about our first capital? One senior lady got mad at me later and said, well, they were here and here. I said, no, for 4 years, not bingity, bingity, bing. Let's travel before the British get us. And I said, no, do you know where Washington gave his last talk? No. Do you know where Wall Street is? Well, believe it or not, about half the people don't know.
Yeah. So the point you're making is we just have a lot that we need to learn, right? About our history.
Well, yes. But even in Texas, it's under a program called STEM, or now STEAM, where they've added the arts, and they're cutting out history and loading history, middle school at least, and maybe high school, teachers with more kids because history doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, it's just an illustration, again, of the fact that we just need to do a better job of teaching history. And I recognize that we won't teach unless you have a test. And sometimes we complain, Penna, about teaching to the test. But I just, again, make my argument, unless somebody's got a better answer than I do, that if we required every person to graduate from high school to pass the citizenship test, all of a sudden, some of those things that aren't getting taught would be taught because they would want to get their high school diploma.
If
right?
we were doing a show on education, we could talk about the fact that at one point they sort of switched from history to social studies.
Yes.
And that sort of changed the tone of the way we teach history. And they would say, well, some of my favorite teachers were history teachers because a really good history teacher can just make it come alive. But, educators would say it's boring, it's dates and memorization and all of that. And it's just too bad in a sense. I would love to bring it back. I think your suggestion, though, Kerby, is great. I mean, we already have a test. We have standards that we could use for teaching history. That would be great.
Well, if nothing else, you appreciate history, right, before you go to law school?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what my undergrad degree is in.
I knew it was.
And have had some great history professors, just like Penna said, who I remember one in particular who taught my class on the Civil War, who just sat at the desk with his notes in his lap and just started telling a story at the beginning.
Telling stories.
3 hours later, you're like, "What? Where did class time go?" And half the time I forgot to take notes because I was just sitting there, just enthralled, listening to this guy tell you what's going on. And I had great high school history teachers. And that's why I ended up majoring in history. When I left high school, I was like, there's nothing else that I want to study anymore. other than this.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do another 4 years of math and science. I know I'll have to do a little bit, right? But this is what I want to know more of.
Yes.
And
history departments where you have Christians in charge of those history departments. We've talked about ones that, Baylor, for example, who I have on so often, and some of the others up in Pennsylvania and others, they come alive because if you aren't a Christian, history is just dates and people. But if you're a Christian, you say, well, it's his story, and there's a significance to it. There's a plan, and there's a narrative, and all sorts of things. So that's part of it as well, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And even for public education, you have to know where your country has been if you want to really know
That's very
where
true.
it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the founders of one of the very first acts of Congress, the Northwest Ordinance, when they were settling the Northwest territories, they wrote in the ordinance.
I remember that.
That, and I'll paraphrase it here because I won't get it word for word, but that morality being necessary to the happiness of the American people, a system of public education shall be established.
Yeah.
Their original idea for education was to teach morality.
Yeah.
Because the quote, John Adams said, this government this Constitution can only govern a moral people.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely inadequate to govern any other. And there are things that are common natural laws.
Oh, sure.
In morality that you can teach, not that you're teaching a particular religion, but you are teaching a sense of morality. That's what the founders' original idea for education was, because you had to produce people who were capable of living under this system of government. This system of government assumes a certain level of responsibility by every individual who lives here. And there's a certain morality in the way you interact with each other that is necessary if you're going to live in a republic and if you're going to live in a free society. And once that is no longer the common denominator, you are inviting tyranny, because when you cannot trust that one man will respect the life and the rights of another man, then what is the answer? What do the people always cry out for? We need a strong ruler to come in here and clamp down on all this, and pretty soon he's clamping down on everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, but you don't know that if you don't know the history of this country and where this country came from, why we fought the Revolutionary War, why the concept of natural law, and the founders were saying, this is a return to the natural order.
Right.
Kings and parliaments can only defy natural law for so long. It's inevitable. Tyranny is unnatural. Freedom is natural. That's what they were saying in the Declaration of Independence. If you don't know this, you don't know where your country came from, you are doomed to make the same mistakes that other people have made.
That is exactly
throughout the history of the world. And I mean, we see it right now. People just put a new name or a new word in front of the word socialism.
Yeah.
And they call it democratic socialism or American socialism or whatever it is, and rebrand it. It's the same terrible idea that's been around for hundreds of years.
And I was just thinking, one of the best antidotes to the concern right now that the young people are enamored with socialism is to teach them about socialism. But back to what you said in terms of the founders, they talked about this idea of cultivating public virtue, because if you have to have a police officer on every street corner, that becomes tyranny. But if you can assume that people are going to learn morality and do the right thing, then you don't have to have such a large police force. And even of all people, Mike Huckabee used that in the campaign. He said, I want to talk about two towns, Hucktown and your town. Hucktown, where everybody's married and nobody's doing drugs and everybody's working hard and they're raising families. And the cost of Hucktown is very small because we don't have to have a large police force. We don't have to do drug testing for people that are going to go involved in various kinds of enterprises and things like that. And compare that to your town. And Hucktown, I've had some people say, I want to live in Hucktown because your town has an astronomical divorce rate, drug use rate, crime rate, and all of those things. And so, again, if you can depend on cultivating public virtue, if you can depend on the citizens doing the right thing without having a police officer look over their shoulders, that's a smaller republic, and that's the kind of world we really want to live in. So, great stories.
I remember Phyllis Schlafly used to say the family is the best department of health and human services that we could have.
And again, just think where we would be if we had strong families. The Department of Health and Human Services, when we were saying before, is maybe the 6th largest government in the world. We could make it a lot smaller if families were strong. We'll come back and talk about some of these Supreme Court cases, especially what's going on at First Liberty, right after this.
A feminist writer and podcaster named Megan Murphy recently had her Twitter account suspended due, she thinks, to her observation that, quote, men aren't women. The notice from Twitter said this was hate speech. This reveals the conflict between two ideologies of the left, feminism and transgenderism. Ms. Murphy maintains that the transgender ideology undermines feminism because feminism depends upon femaleness being a real gender category. If men can be women, then what is feminism? The first iteration of feminism celebrated the differences between men and women and sought rights for women in light of those differences. But when feminism moved into its radical second wave in the 1960s, there was this attempt to deconstruct gender. Radical feminists would not tolerate references to differences between men and women. They insisted upon sexual parity in all discussions. At the same time, they sought the advancement of women. The transgender moment we're in is a very uncomfortable one for the feminist who maintains this kind of thinking. It's pretty tough to reconcile the push for opportunities and rights for women with the idea that gender is fluid and men can be women. The feminist movement can celebrate real accomplishments in fields like women's sports, but the transgender movement mitigates the good in this by insisting that biological males be allowed to participate. In a commentary, John Stonestreet of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview asks the question, are women real? If men can be women, then this is a fair question. John Stonestreet suggests that feminists and progressives consider the principle outlined in the book of Genesis, that there is a difference between sexes, and this is an intrinsic and good feature of human nature that together magnifies the divine image which both men and women bear. Radical feminism's logical successor is transgender ideology. Some feminists, like Megan Murphy, are beginning to realize the two cannot coexist. Christians can show them a better way. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Two things before we go, and first of those is that Penna Dexter does a commentary, which, of course, if you are listening online, you've heard her do, and it's called Feminism Begat Transgenderism. And then I do also encourage you, if you've not signed up to receive hers, it will actually show up in your inbox tomorrow if you've signed up. And then I want to talk about some of these cases before the Supreme Court or cases being considered by the Supreme Court. And so that link is also on our website to First Liberty. But Penna Dexter, first of all, a feminist writer named Megan Murphy recently had her Twitter account suspended due to her observation, horrors now, get control of your emotions here, men aren't women. Oh my goodness, what have we come into?
You can't speak the truth now. And
it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I think just to give a quick little sentence summarizing this, really transgender ideology undermines feminism. And the feminist ideology sort of spawned transgenderism because they tried to say that the differences between men and women are socially constructed. And so now, I mean, if men can be women, then what is feminism? And in a sense, feminists have made a lot of gains. And for instance, in one area, it's women's sports. But then the transgender movement comes in and says, well, transgender men should be able to participate. So, it undermines the gains in a sense. And there's so many areas in which this happens. That's why, in a sense, some of these progressive ideas are really kind of craziness. And you have to suspend your mental health in order to buy into some of this.
Yeah.
And Lathan mentioned another development during the break that kind of makes this case.
Yeah, I heard that the kind of the odds-on favorite to win Miss Universe is actually a man, or a transgender woman, whatever the term is.
Okay.
And you better use the right pronouns, because remember that
you
French
might get
teacher,
fired if you don't.
Yeah, French teacher gets fired because he doesn't use the right pronouns for a transgendered individual. Anyway, you've got a really good piece. Penna Dexter's commentary is there. And, of course, you also quote from our good friend John Stonestreet. And I just encourage people to read that and to post it. And, again, there's a little red button there that says sign up. And if you sign up, you'll receive my commentary Monday through Friday, and Penna's on Saturday. And I just... Penna's an outstanding writer, and already a couple times here we've talked about some of your articles. For example, we've talked about Betsy DeVos and things like that. So if you go there, you can do a search and find some of those. Post them on your Facebook page. It will start a controversy.
Just one more little thought. Stonestreet, I thought the title of the piece that he wrote, and people might want to go back and look at the Colson Center, was "Are Women Real?"
Yes.
And that's a real question now.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's being questioned by...
Everything can be everything.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wish we had a little more time, but I did want to mention just a minute ago that we did want to talk about a couple of cases. Now, you do have one case before the Supreme Court right now, the Bladensburg case. There's a place, if you go to firstliberty.org, you can sign the petition or get some more information and really sign up to get the updates, because a lot of people want to know, and let's see if you can help us out, when are oral arguments and what's going to happen, do you think?
Right, so the Bladensburg World War I Memorial, our clients, the American Legion, in that case, oral argument in front of the Supreme Court will be in March. And so we're in the process of drafting the briefs and collecting amicus briefs and getting those filed with the court. And then that'll be argued in March. And I would anticipate maybe a ruling in June.
Yeah.
We're still waiting to hear if they're going to take Coach Kennedy's case.
That was the other one I was going to ask, yeah. Seventh overtime. What does that mean?
Well, it means that he has been listed 7 times now on the conference list. So there's every week there's a list of cases that the justices are going to get together and discuss.
I see.
And typically after the conference, there will be a set of orders that come out. There'll be a list of cert granted. These are the cases that we've decided to take. A much longer list of cert denied. These are the cases that we decided not to take. Or they can relist a case for the conference for next week.
And good news, he has not been eliminated.
Exactly.
He's not.
As long as we don't see his name on the cert denied list, then there's still hope.
Isn't that something?
But he's been relisted now 6 or 7 times. So they are taking their time. They're discussing it thoroughly, I'm sure. There's no real way to know what the holdup is, why they have continued to relist it, but we're cautiously optimistic, praying hard that they're going to take this case and do the right thing.
If they do, that will be 2. And our friends at ADF last year had 2, and I saw how exhausted they seemed to be doing. People have no idea what it takes to prepare 2 cases before the Supreme Court. That just wears me out.
You may have another one.
And that's true. Aaron and Melissa Klein, our clients in Oregon, we've appealed their case to the Supreme Court as well. So we're waiting to hear if the court will take their case. But that if we had 3, it's a good problem to have. But you probably see some significant baggage under the eyes of everybody at First Liberty Institute. But
it might be harder to get you on the program here. But, aren't the first set of cases due, or the at least the friend of the court and the amicus briefs, aren't they due like Christmas or something like that?
Yeah, I think the amicus briefs on Bladensburg, I think the due date's Christmas Eve.
No rest for the weary, right, Penna?
Right. So, I feel bad for those attorneys drafting those amicus briefs. But we're, as I said before, we're cautiously optimistic on Coach and waiting to see on the Kleins. And obviously we're preparing for Bladensburg. So, these are big cases. The Bladensburg World War I Memorial would be, if they had not taken that case, that memorial would be coming down. But then the Fourth Circuit opinion would be the standing opinion, and the American Humanist Association, who filed the original lawsuit, could then go to Arlington National Cemetery and take down the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice, the Argonne Cross, go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, sandblast the word God off the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Memorials all over the country would be in danger. This is an important case. It's not just about that one memorial there in Bladensburg, Maryland, which happens to be one of the first World War I memorials in the country. It's been there nearly 100 years.
And I might just mention, if I can give you some props here, you've got a couple of articles coming out, one on the Bladensburg case, don't you? So
waiting to see,
and once it comes out, I want to post it and we'll talk about it. Maybe get you by phone or something like that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, waiting to see where it's going to be published. But coming up probably right around Christmas, another article about one of the soldiers whose names is on that memorial, and just kind of giving some background to just that one story. Who he is one of many. There's 49 men memorialized there from Prince George's County, Maryland. But so that, it's an important case. Obviously, Coach Kennedy's case. The Ninth Circuit is the largest geographically.
I know.
So more Americans live there probably than many of the other circuits. And if that opinion is allowed to stand, it would be a bad day for America, honestly. Anybody who works in any form of government who was seen doing something religious, has somehow violated the Establishment Clause, according to the Ninth Circuit. So that's why we're trying to get the court to take that case and overturn it, send it back, give us another chance to get this right for Coach Kennedy and everybody else of all faith who happen to work in some area of the government that's supported by the taxpayer.
Well, you've got right now what I think is the most pro-religious liberty court, because the court's always looked at the Establishment Clause. Now it seems like the court might actually recognize there's a thing called the Free Exercise Clause.
Exactly. There seems to have gotten a little bit out of balance as far as the focus, as you said, has been a lot on, well, does this violate the Establishment Clause? And to the detriment of cases, have we violated someone's free exercise rights?
Well, again, thank you both for being here. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday right here on Point of View.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.